Welcome to a place where we're thinking together and thinking deeper about who we are.
Where we are and what we do in this world.
Welcome to the Billosophy podcast.
Thanks, man. You're looking good. So I'm going to start. This is the first Zoom interview on the Billosophy podcast. And today I am joined with, or by...
I am Jonathan Lee Iverson.
Jonathan Lee Iverson. So for those of you, if you're watching the video of this, you can see the big smile on my face because it is, even though we're only virtually in the same room, it is just amazing to be in the room with this person. This because I've heard so much about you. And Jonathan Lee Iverson, tell me a little bit about yourself, from in your words, because I can give the big overview of you. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, it always depends on who you hear it from. I'm a very fortunate New York native, born and bred in New York City. I'm a Harlemite. I'm a choir boy who basically grew up with a unexpected interest in opera. Mm-hmm. And it grew into this great fascination, which I thought that's exactly what I would do with my life. And eventually I ended up taking this fantastic, whimsical, historical detour that was presented to me in the form of the greatest show on earth. Obviously, I had my own plans, but I've learned throughout life that God is a stand-up comedian and a prankster. And I think he thwarted those plans for my good. And I went from plans of maybe doing a year or two, and I'd have really fascinating stories of how I ran away with the circus and hung out with all these wonderful circus people and probably dated a few acrobats or whatever, to ending up with an 18-year career with a wife and children in tow, and really just meeting some of the most amazing people and having the most dynamic experiences ever. And I really think it's one of those journeys that really, it just reminds you of how we all have this commonality, I mean, it just is shocking. I always boast that circus, maybe unbeknownst to itself, has the formula of how we can actually get along,
I will say, I was looking over your bio and I was like, what? So Boys Choir of Harlem. Let's go back to that, because that is phenomenal. You guys, you traveled. There's a I don't know how far and wide the stories go about that, but there's a history and there's a tradition that is steeped in. I know that you guys were trained in respect, diplomacy. You were also schooled in your music. There's so much about, I don't even have to get to the Ringmaster part. The Boys Choir of Harlem part is just, my mind was blown.
Yeah.
Tell me about that experience.
That experience really, it just shaped everything in my life. Till this day, even the way I interact with my children in regards to their work, their academics, their curiosity about what their vocation may be. Mm-hmm. I actually feel myself regurgitating the lessons of the founder and director, the late, great Dr. Walter J. Turnbull, and all of his other emissaries. There was just such a level of excellence that you were supposed to reach. I think he was a genius. He had his foibles, but, he was one of those. Dr. Turnbull really was what I call a Harlem angel. Mm-hmm. At the time, it was Harlem before Starbucks and Bank of America and Magic Johnson theaters, right, where you had to step over a few vices just to get to choir rehearsal.
Right.
His level of the expectation and excellence, seeing that from a man to budding young men, mm-hmm, does something. And I think it all falls in that tradition, warrior cultures, where, right, the elders, men would go into the village and they would take the boys out and they'd go up into the mountains, and when they came back, they knew how to lead. They knew how to, and seeing the demands that Walter Turnbull had for us, and the fact that he believed so hard in us to do it.
Oh yeah.
And I think the thing that was so, I mean, that sticks with me to this day was his invitation to us and his blessing that we had every right to be fully human.
Right. You didn't.
And he taught it. Yeah, he taught it through music.
Right.
You know, I never looked at Mozart any better than I looked at Billy Strayhorn. You know, like,
right.
And through that, you know, he taught us the value of all music, but he taught us the value of ourselves through music, which was just extraordinary.
Right. And also, you weren't fighting in a way where somebody's trying to pick you up. You weren't fighting your own blackness in the process. You were being schooled by
right.
You were being mentored, schooled by someone who had followed a path that may be similar to yours, but it was helping you with that path that wasn't about, oh, you got to fight who you are in order to be what you're going to become. It's
exactly. And right. Mm-hmm. Let me tell you, this is something I thought about the other day. I was sitting and because I'm, you know, my wife's been looking at me with an evil eye for some years now, rightfully so, because I'm behind in writing the book. But I said, you know, honey, it's a process. And I was thinking of the gift that Dr. Turnbull gave us subtly. You know, back then, 80s, 90s, you know, your hair, you know, you remember guys had all sorts of designs. And
I had a high top fade.
Yeah, we all had the high tops. And we had guys in the choir who could cut hair really good, who really knew how to take care of hair. But he encouraged that. Like, he wasn't one of these where, you know, you've got to have this uniform look, or where he would unconsciously demean our Black genius,
yes.
Our own creativity within ourselves. There were kids with dreadlocks, he would encourage it. All he wanted from you is that you look clean, you look presentable. But he encouraged the high top
presentable.
Yeah, he said, just look like look like we take care, and we did. We looked really clean. I mean, it was actually, in many respects, it kind of worked against us in fundraising. He would say, because he said, we look so good that people think we're just rolling in money. Mm-hmm. And they were always strapped. I mean, it was non-for-profit. They were always strapped, but he was very hard on us about presentation, not just on the stage, but behind the scenes. We used to have to set up our stage, build a ride. I knew kids who knew how to work lights and sound at 12, you know.
And you weren't in the news. You weren't having a Boys Choir of Harlem member did this, you know. That wasn't happening.
He wasn't having it. I mean, on more than a few occasions, he made some threats.
Okay.
We would go to these hotels, and he'd say very bluntly, he said, listen, he said, you're not going to go in here and act a fool. He said, because you might not make it back home. You know, his mother was a domestic. He came from Mississippi. He said it to us in a very reasonable way. He said, listen, just because they have people who clean up after you, so to speak, doesn't mean you have to turn it into a wild place. You know, be considerate, be respectful. And all those, like, we would go in a restaurant and you could see the wait staff get nervous. I mean, you see 30, 40 boys, adolescents coming in there. And, you know, you're probably thinking, oh my goodness, these kids are going to run wild and crazy. We literally would go to restaurants, and after we finished, whole staffs, chefs and all, would come out and applaud us. And we're laughing and we're going, what is, they were like, you know, we were so nervous because we just thought you all were going to wreck the place because we were kids, just kids. Right. This had nothing to do with race. It was just like, and you've been in restaurants where you see them kids come in and you just know this is not going well. And they would come and they just were so, they were just so thankful. We were crazy. But his thing for us was, you have to be an ambassador. Be a good citizen. That was his big thing. Be a good citizen. Be somebody worth your name.
My internet is doing some weird stuff, so you're cutting out. I think I've lost you, but I think you're coming back.
Oh, okay.
There you go. All right, good, you're back. Like, wow,
All right.
all the technical difficulties of doing this. So I want to jump. I'm going to use that little internet glitch to segue. You also went from there. You went on to Fiorella LaGuardia, and
Oh, yeah.
for
Yeah,
the
at the
folks
same
who don't
time.
know, the Fiorella LaGuardia is what the television show and the movie Fame were based off of.
Yep.
And because I had gone to AMDA when it was at the Ansonia building on 73rd and Broadway, and we would go down and head to Lincoln Center, and we'd always pass the LaGuardia kids doing their thing, and we were even though we were at the next level, the college level.
Right.
Man, we were jealous. we were jealous of you. I was like, man, they got that. They're good. They got that schooling and they're getting it.
Oh, man.
And then, of course, and also LaGuardia's proximity to Juilliard as well. There's
and the Met, and New York City Opera, and Lincoln Center. You know, I mean, how blessed. You know, I mean, I always laugh about my adolescent life. Like, I really was privileged. It was like I had a double life. You know, not only did I go to that wonderful high school, but I was still in the boys choir at the same time. Mm-hmm. So I'd be in Spanish class one week, and then I'd be in Spain the next month. And so, you know, let's say my Spanish teacher, I'll never forget it. She was a lovely woman, and she was very good, Miss Halprin. And Miss Halprin would, the teachers, when I would go on tour, they would just give me the syllabus, and, you know, I would have to keep up. And that was common. There were other students who had done different things. Some were on Broadway, some were in like soap operas or something or whatever. So that was encouraged. And it was it was a wonderful experience, you know, just having that kind of life where it was just this full-blown arts education, including the environment. I mean, that's the big thing. You know, I was ensconced in this environment where the dream was a real thing. It wasn't like, oh, these kids have these. It was a real thing. The late, great Jessie Norman, who was so gracious, she had a thing where she would actually take some of the students, mainly like sopranos, you know, budding sopranos, whatever. She would take them on tours of the Met, and you know, we'd have certain opera legends like Riri Christ who would come to our school and conduct master classes. We even had this thing we did annually called Grammy Day at the school. So right before the Grammys had their big thing, they would bring some of their artists. Some big music artists would come. Several of them would come, and it would be basically an all-day thing. And they would give lectures. They would perform. I saw the great Henry Mancini. No, he came out, our band, the whole auditorium blew up. I mean, like he just came strolling out. And to think someone of his generation was getting those kind of kudos from all these young kids. I mean, I said, that's, to me, I was like, if you need a case for why the arts is so vital, like the fact that all of us knew him the minute he walked out and we heard the music and he had a blast. I mean, he was the cool kid in the room. He must, you know, he was. I mean, to see him, I heard Aaron Neville sing the most beautiful version of Ave Maria I've ever heard. I mean, the Aaron Neville. And, you know, and we had all of these wonderful conversations with different people in the recording industry telling you not to, you know, they were big on giving us lectures about different facets of the industry where you could have a prosperous career and you don't have to necessarily be the big star on the stage. There were people talking about their careers as studio musicians. I remember that big time. You know, they was like, your musicianship just needs to be really tight because you're doing a lot of jingles. You make great living doing that. So it was really a great hands-on education.
Wow, that's amazing. So this is for the folks, if you're just joining me right here at the Billosophy podcast, vlog, or whatever this is now, I'm speaking with Jonathan Lee Iverson, who is, I guess, now well known as the last ringmaster for Ringling Brothers and Barnum Bailey Circus. and we are just going down memory lane of what got him there. His Boys Choir of Harlem stuff and his time at the Fiorello LaGuardia High School for the Performing Arts. And now we're going to move on a little bit more and get to going from LaGuardia. So you leave the Boys Choir of Harlem, you leave LaGuardia, it's off to college. Did things change where things happened? Was it still, because I look at your life and go, it's magical to this point. Was it magical in that space, or was there a point where it was taxing, hard? I mean, it may have all been.
It's funny. College was a bit of both, but it's fascinating. I think by then I discovered, when you've been granted a gift, mm-hmm. some of the privileges you can get. And so I had the privilege of getting a lot of scholarship money to go to the Hart School of Music in Hartford, Connecticut. And to be quite frank with you, I charmed my way out of high school. My teachers were very generous. And it was funny. I remember getting a recommendation from my vice principal, and he was so cool. I forgot his name. Such a great man. And, we were laughing while he was giving me the recommendation. He said, look, he said, you know what it is, Jonathan? He said, you already know what you want to be.
Right.
And we know you can do the work, because I'm looking every year, your scores go up. Mm-hmm. And the teachers were always so generous to me. They would say, listen, if you pass this and you do X amount of this, I'll be able to pass you. And I would get it done. And so, because, it was wonderful having that kind of support, because they kind of knew, all right, he's not necessarily going to be some big academic. So he probably doesn't need to know that, for the requirements, he needs to do it. And I would do it. I get the work done. But I ended up at the Hart School of Music. And I went there specifically for my voice teacher, who was the late, great Jerome Pruitt. And he was a wonderful world-class tenor, one of the most beautiful voices mm-hmm. you ever hear in your life. I mean, to me, he's one of the greatest singers I've ever heard in my life, ever. He's up there to me with Pavarotti and all of them. And, that's the thing you discover in opera. There are a lot of real jewels out there who may not have gotten a big spotlight, but had really substantial careers. And he was one of them. Mm-hmm. And I read his bio and I said, I want to study with that guy.
Right.
And that's really why I went to that school. And I wasn't disappointed. I was mainly impressed because he was a working singer. He was, in fact, my first year at Hart School, he told me very bluntly, he said, I'm likely not going to be here too much because I still have contracts over in Europe. Mm-hmm. And he did. And his sub was extraordinary. And she was actually very highly competent. I learned so much from her. Dr. Sherry Overholt, who herself was a working performing artist as well. So for me, I always prided myself as a student. I don't believe, I don't believe in having a novice or an academic as my teacher. I want somebody who has scars. And it's the same thing with circus. Right?
Yeah, you want somebody with some drag marks, that somebody who's all a little bit, their fingernails a little broken, because they've been in the trenches, they know what the experience is like, and they're not. And also, I understand that, because as a coach, I didn't think I was ready, because I was still doing the job, right? And then I went, wait a minute, this is what they need to hear, because I'm still doing it. And there are often times I would be with my students, I say, we're in the same boat. I am still hustling to get the work as I help you to learn how to hustle to get the work. And
it's priceless.
And we're going out there and getting it and doing it, and we're continuing to do it together. Now, here's the difference is I do have some people that I've connected with, and I'm in with some groups and some niches and some, I have my connections.
Yeah.
That's not going to help me all the time, because you got to show up with the skills as well.
Yeah. Look, and that's the thing. I call it the Yoda effect. Mm-hmm. I want a Yoda. I want the master teacher who can really do it, right? And who, all of my teachers were like that since the beginning. So I was very spoiled, because Dr. Walter J. Turnbull was an actual musician. He was the real thing, and he had created the Boys Choir to basically as a project to keep kids out of trouble, what have you. It started in Ephesus Church, It was the Ephesus Boys Choir then, and then it just grew and became the world-renowned Boys Choir of Harlem, and that became his wife. That was his passion. That was his life.
Mm-hmm.
But he was a real accomplished musician, and and that, to me, having hit somebody with that kind of caliber and depth of understanding of the craft as your first teacher, you know, it's like flying first class for the first time. You can't, you know, I can't do coach. And when I would train, I would know within 3 minutes if, you know, if a person just wasn't, what my body would let me know. It was like, I just knew we don't work. And I walked out of sessions with people because it's like, because you have to protect yourself. And this is something I share with a lot of young artists, whatever craft they may be in. I always tell them, listen, you're not beholden to what other people's vision of you might be. You have to tune into yourself. And your body, your mind, your spirit really will give you cues.
Right.
You just have to be courageous enough to obey them.
Right.
Because I've seen it, you've seen it in this business.
Yeah.
We've seen tons of people, great talents, who are ruined because they neglect that voice, because they're seduced by the bigness of the so-called great coach, the so-called great trainer, what have you, who really, they may be great, but they may not be for you. And you have to know better.
Right. And understanding, one of the things I say, and there's a motivational speaker, his name is Johannes, but it's that everyone does not have your best interest in heart. And they may be helping you, but they may not be helping you for their reasons, not for yours. And and that can be okay as well. You have to understand, is it healthy or is it unhealthy? You know, which way, how's it going to work? And I had a dear friend, won't mention name, who got cast in a Broadway show, but the way she got cast was unethical, and the show never opened. She stopped performing afterwards because of what she had. The price she paid to get there just was debilitating for her soul.
Wow.
And she gave up on performing, moved back to upstate Pennsylvania, was done, and she thought, this is my big break. And I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit of me. She sacrificed too much.
Yeah. You know, life will do that to you. I remember there's a story that Sidney Poitier speaks of in his book, A Measure of a Man. It's a wonderful book, and he gives this lesson. I remember he was talking about how there was a particular job he was up for, and, you know, he definitely needed the money. You know, he wasn't Sidney yet.
Right.
And, but he had a principle where he would not play anything that would demean him, you know, and demean his, you know, he had a great sense of heritage, a great sense of himself as an individual. Right. And, you know, he said maybe a few jobs later, his break came. But, you know, we often find ourselves like that. And I find it's not just artists, it's people, period. I think life gives us these kind of fascinating tests to see, not only do you want it, but, you know, what are you willing to do about it? Because, you know, listen, I think scripture is correct when it says, you know, what is it that a man gains? If, you know, what good does it do to gain the world but lose your soul?
Yes,
and
exactly.
You see a lot of these people, they get success, they get all the toys and the money and what have you, and they're miserable because, you know, there's something to being able to actually sit down with yourself, look in the mirror at yourself, and know, you know what, I didn't have to give off pieces of myself to make this happen. And, you know, I get why people do it. You know, you get desperate, you get hungry, you want something so bad. I don't judge them, but, you know, I do caution people a lot, you know, in the pursuit of what it is that you truly are. You're going to inevitably run into that proposition.
Oh, yeah. Oh yeah, and it's here more than anything, any place else. It's here, and it's understanding. And I talk about you are enough, being the perfect you that you are, because if you're not rooted in your soul, in yourself, then you're going to make those choices in a very unhealthy way.
I love that mantra so much. I've heard you say it a lot, and I love it because it's so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, as simple as it is, you know, and the truth is simple.
Mm-hmm.
You know, simple as it is, when you hear it enough, it's so powerful. You know, because you know, even those of us who may have had successes without selling, we have to hear that. You know, because I remember when I heard you say, I said, you know, because I've been contemplating certain new things, because now we have to remake ourselves, right?
Right.
and hearing you say that, I was like, yeah, you know, it's like just remind, because I've had to say it to myself over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you're never too accomplished, you're never too old, you're never too seasoned to hear it again. You know what? Yes, you are enough. You are enough.
Right. Now, there's another, you mentioned Sidney being a kind of a motivating force in your world, and hearing and reading his works, hearing his words. On your bio, it says that you met or worked with, I'm not sure how deep it goes, Jeffrey Holder. He is one of those people I wish I had just had the chance to sit in his presence, because his work and hearing how he impacted other people's lives, and the way I've heard a story of a guy who was not even in the entertainment business, was down and out, happened to be in Brooklyn or something. Jeffrey Holder got this guy, and this is a guy who I met personally. He said, come with me. And he brought him home. He fed him. He said, stay here as long as you need. And then showed him different avenues that he could take where he could help out in the community, do different things. And it just gave him, to have one person have that much faith in you when you were at the lowest. When this is a person, he felt like he didn't have anything at the time. He was homeless, he was penniless, and he was on the streets. And Jeffrey Holder brought him in and said, this is not where you belong. And that was all it took. And I've heard stories like that. I've heard other artists talk about how Jeffrey Holder helped them out with cash. I have heard him with Jeffrey Holder said, hey, let's dance together. Let's play together, you know, and just let's be together. And so I just want to know what your story is, if you have any stories of the Jeffrey Holder.
So one of the reasons I'm a fan of yours is you have his light. There's a way about him that I see in you. And Jeffrey Holder I always had a sensitivity to voices. So obviously my first encounter with him was those famous 7-Up commercials, you know.
Yes.
And obviously I was a kid. I didn't know, you know, how majestic this man was. I was given the awesome privilege of him being our director for the Boys Choir of Harlem and Friends on Broadway. And he was just like this, he was energy. He was just, you rarely meet somebody who you just know, man, they know who they are. They know why God made them, and they're in their assignment. And that's an exhilarating feeling. And him being as big as he was, I was shocked to know that he was a renowned dancer, because he was such a tall man.
Yeah.
And he just taught me so much in his presence. And he was very kind and very inspiring to each and every member of the choir who was there. I remember I used to just love the way he called his wife's name. His wife, Carmen de Lavallade, the great Carmen de Lavallade, who's just, the woman's just eternally gorgeous. And she danced in the show as well. And he would just call her Carmen, the way he just say it, you know. I said, man, I was like, man, she must be like his muse or something.
Right.
And she was. I mean, he would design some of her outfits. And then, I mean, like, he was just this force of nature. And I remember he pulled me to the side during a rehearsal. A couple of times he did this. And he told me to my face, he said, you know what? He said, you've got what it takes. And he wasn't saying this like, no, he looked at, he said, you can literally go out there and you can make it big. He said, just work on this. He said, but you've got it. that meant like, I mean, I was floored hearing that from him. You know, I was but the most wonderful thing when I really knew how glorious this guy was, I had the great privilege of connecting with him not too long before he would pass away.
Mm-hmm.
He happened to be in a home, in a nursing home in New York City, and there was a wonderful gentleman who I connected with who is very in the Broadway world, and he said, "You want to go see Jeffrey?" I said, "Of course." And by then I'd been in the show for quite some time, and we got to see him. And he's in his nursing home now. He didn't really remember me, his body, you know. But he still has his energy, you know. Mm-hmm. He just has this. You go in. I went into his room, and all of it, you just see every wall, every corner, stacks of paintings. You know, he was also a prolific painter. I mean, just stacks of them. He still was doing. And when we walked in, he was still.
Oh no, I lost you. What happened there? Well, I'm talking to Jonathan Lee Iverson. It looks like our connection got a little messed up there. Working with the internet, doing this my first Zoom interview. I lost you for a moment there, but you're back.
So yeah, we were in his room, and it was incredible. You know, his energy. He just had this. He still had that life, even though his body was limited. You could just see it emanating from him. He just had that just precious thing about him, and it was just so. For me, it meant so much just to be in his presence, to see how he lived. He was a creative force. He was transcendent in so many respects. He was just like that. I don't want to say but you know, it's almost that close to perfect human.
He was
being.
Human. He was fully human. Yeah.
He was fully human, and you could just like people were drawn to him, and it made sense. I mean, he just was just this magnificent being, you know. And it blew my mind, and I knew it was interesting because.
I've lost you again. Hopefully this is still going on the recording, and we'll catch it up when this thing buffers. There it is. We're back again. I'm sorry.
No problem. It happens. You know, it was interesting. I always judge a man by, and even the way a person talks about their spouse, mm-hmm. and how and I look for like their body language when they speak about them. Kind of tells me a lot. Oh yeah. You know, so for me, Jeffrey, I can't think of him without thinking about Carmen de Lavallade. Mm-hmm. It was just the way he would speak of her. You know, He spoke of her like she was made of magic or something. Right. And that stayed with me because I remember, and I didn't really know how to articulate it as a 16-year-old. Some years prior to that, I saw it happen with none other than Nancy Reagan. We were doing a friendship concert in Japan, the Boys Choir and I, for Ronald and Nancy Reagan. And Ronald was there, but he wasn't. I think he was in the early stages of what would eventually take his life. And what she did was really, it was brilliant. Uh-huh. She was dressed in the nines, of course, she was first lady. And she gets up and basically takes over the room. And because when we came in, she greeted us. She was so warm, and what I realized what she did was she drew attention away from him. She was protecting him. Right. And I realized that later on as I got older and I got married, and I realized these are the interesting things that spouses do for one another, especially spouses who really, really love each other and really have each other's backs. Right. They do, they see the other one may be limping here or falling, and they come in and you don't even know the difference. Right. And she did that for him. And so from then on, I always kind of, when I talk to people who are married, they could be the most brilliant guy in the room, But if I see there's something off when you're talking about your spouse,
Yes.
it kind of, it throws me, and it kind of tells me everything I need to know about you. But if I can see this, it's energy, you know, we're all energy, and you can tell when somebody deeply, especially with women, you know, I think women emit that energy far more fluently than we do. We're still learning as men, but women naturally, I think it's when a woman's in love with you, you know, like when she loves that dude, like she'll hide the body.
Right.
Yeah. You can see it. And I saw that with the First Lady, and I saw it in many respects with Jeffrey Holder in regards to his Carmen.
So it's funny because we're having this conversation here, and I know that I listened to a few of your other interviews and conversation with folks, and it's often centered on your being the first and last African American ringmaster with Ringling Brothers and Barnum Bailey Circus. And I'm not even going to talk about that because I'm so jealous. So jealous. But I started out as a clown, got to be an acrobat, didn't make it to the ringmaster of Ringling. I got else, but in that thing, the ringmaster, the one who holds it all together. You know, we look at the people flipping and flying, and you are the ringmaster is the epitome of poise and stoicism, yet a welcome stoicism. You know what I mean? You're a pillar, but you're a huggable pillar.
Right.
So stepping into that role, did that change how you were in the world? Because you already had the ambassadorial and the diplomacy stuff from the boys choir. You've also learned, you had the technique going already. So what did that change in you to be the ringmaster, and also to be such a figurehead as a ringmaster? You're frozen again. My goodness.
So, you know, I could tell you, I had to grow up in the role. I knew I had all the tools intellectually, but it's another thing to exercise them. Like immediately I understood, okay, I'm well-traveled. I'm fine with being around different types of people. I grew up in New York City, traveled a lot. I have the energy to sustain this type of schedule. But it was like putting a puzzle together, you know, because you know how circus world is. They throw you in the ocean and you just have to sink and swim. Hello?
Yep, there you are.
There we go.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, I figured out, I realized, wow, I am enough. And all of those pieces, everything leading up to then was just right for me, you know, to really.
It keeps freezing. This is technology at its greatest. We're going to make this work out. So we may have to wrap it up because for some reason, I don't know, midday, whatever, I'm in Vermont as well. So that probably isn't helping any. So stepping in that role, there's a lot you had to learn, a lot you had to do with that. Did the previous ringmaster help you, or were you just given videotapes or whatever to look at?
Oh no, I got no help.
Oh really?
I got no help. No. I asked, but I didn't get anything. I mean, certain people would maybe throw a pointer out here or two, but I got no help. I got wonderful encouragement, mainly from ringmasters of other shows. Okay. Jimmy James Plott being one of them. The late great Jimmy James Plott. He came to the show, came with Jimmy a nice canister,
a legend.
Yeah, and he was very kind. And he told me very bluntly, he said, look them in the eye and tell them what you want. And I remember John Fugate. John Fugate was the first one to tell me, he said, listen, he said, once that sawdust gets in you, you're never going to be the same. Yeah. And so those were the ones. Yeah, I didn't really get it. I mean, Jim Ragona, you know, he told me a few things, but nobody was, you know, I mean, Eric Michael Gillette introduced me to a different type of throat lozenge, but that was about it. Nobody, and wonderfully enough, I think that is actually the way to go, because each ringmaster, it's not a role, you know, it's really the personification of who you are.
Right.
It's expressed. And so you know, in many respects, looking back on it, I think it's the best thing to do is not to, because when I would mentor people who I knew I would never tell them what to do or how to do it. You know, we would work on certain things. I just let them watch me. Mm-hmm. And we talk about certain things that they want, but it had to be them who came to me.
Right.
And I told them, I said, listen, you as an artist, you have a license to steal. If you see something in me that you think works for you, take it. Take it, you know.
Well, I the same thing, because it's not stealing. It's because what happens is once it goes through the filter of who you are, it's a different thing. And there is no original idea. The ideas are all floating. There's a little layer of ideas floating here. We got to pull them down. And sometimes more than one person pulls down the same idea, but doesn't manifest in the same way because the people are different. Yeah, very true. Very true. And I would always know, I mean, there were certain basics, you know, I tell folks, we're going to try. So I didn't get all of that you had said. We're going to just wrap it up again here, because I've kept you for quite a bit here, and it's almost an hour that we've going, and I feel like I'm just starting to scratch the surface. I want to get deeper. So it's a
pleasure, man. We could do it. We could follow up if you like to. This is great.
So one of the things, so looking back, if you could talk to yourself, 14-year-old you who's like, you know, I'm doing this as fun, but what am I going to do? What would you say to yourself?
Oh, I would tell myself to definitely chase wisdom like you chase the most coveted thing you can think of. Covet mentorship, cultivate your inner circle. In relationships, I would tell my younger self, definitely get acquainted with money and master it. Even that early in age. I would also tell myself to really be mindful and a steward of my health. I would definitely, you know, it's funny. I laugh with my wife. I always apologize to her. I say, you know what? I should have married you when I was 35 instead of 25. Because I just think, I really just don't think the male brain is equipped for such a blessed type of union before 35 years old.
I would agree. But also at this point in my life, one of the things I'm working with young men on is, and it's not about not doing something, it's about doing something. And that is, what is healthy masculinity? There's so many of us have learned a toxic masculinity, and that then pours into our relationships, that pours into how we parent, and it's a struggle because having learned toxicity, how do you learn healthy? And
I mean, a lot of it has to do with the fact that it really is. I do feel, you know, anytime you look to destroy anything, right, a nation or whatever, you go after the men first.
Right.
You know, I can't explain it. I don't know what it is. It may be something far dynamic and more spiritual above me. But there is something about a man who really is centered on himself and understands all his facets. I think the problem is we're always retooling, tweaking with manhood, and it has so many different layers. I think manhood is something that has to be groomed, and we have to learn how to really be well invested in the emotional life of men and boys. We do a terrible job of it. We sort of leave us just out there to figure it out. And so many are going through things we can't even imagine because we don't have a space where we can really openly express that. And this is where the art was such a gift for me.
Right.
And I think for every man, we have that artist in us where we want to have that expression, but we don't have a space where it's safe. I have friends like this growing up who we would say we love each other.
Right.
And we would talk about things,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that's highly rare,
Right.
you know, but
Right.
that's because I think a lot of it had to do, we had an arts community. So since we were dealing with intimacy in that respect, without feeling, you know, some kind of way about it,
Right.
but it was pure. You know, it felt safe, you know. It's something that a lot of people won't understand even now, but, you know, a lot of the ideas we have surrounding masculinity, I do agree, they're terribly corrupt, and they're perpetuated. And shockingly enough, they're perpetuated through some of the women we have in our lives, because they don't know any better. They only know from what they've been given to.
Yeah, it's not only us who's doing it. It's a big thing, and also that it's, for me, also stepping into a lot of the work that I've done in my poetry and in my writing is stepping into the culture and the communities, because I know that there is a false narrative about Black men. You know, they don't stay at home, they don't do this, and they're powerful, and they do, you know, and that's a false narrative that isn't necessarily what needs to get perpetuated. Now, the question, when there is a false narrative, so often people fight the false narrative and forget to promote the narrative that is true and honest.
This is where good parenting and good mentorship comes in. Again, I was highly privileged. My mother is an activist, so I didn't watch TV until the Cosby Show came on.
Okay.
And there was a reason for that, because of what the Cosby Show represented. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I mean, we would dissect the news, you know, the whole bit. But my mother always taught me, you know, look, don't believe the hype. A sense of identity was so the norm in my home. And then when I got to the Boys Choir, it was re-emphasized. So the Boys Choir wasn't a program that saved my life as it did other kids. It literally, it corroborated what she was already teaching me. And when I was learning, even from my father, who was a cameo, I wouldn't even call him absent, he was just a cameo. He was right across the bridge in Brooklyn. But I gleaned from my parents, really, till this day, those are the things that established me. So I've never been pulled into I call them projections, because if you really observe, people tend to project onto you what they are.
Yes.
And so I always tell a lot, any young people I'm mentoring or I'm speaking with, you know, to me, that's part of what I say, the charge. I let them know, look, go get wisdom, because in getting that, you're going to find yourself. You're going to start finding, and you're going to start really digging in and seeing the truth as it is and as it pertains to you, you know. And I mean, identity is, I agree, identity is easily the most underrated part of the conversation, you know, because once you know who you are, you know, nobody really can hold anything over you. Mm-hmm. I think that's really one of the big keys, especially for those of us in our community, because our big vulnerability is, of course, we've been separated from certain things. But, you know, I think we forget, you know, the way human beings are designed, isn't it interesting how that DNA can never part from you? Right. You know, there's genius and there's stuff that pops out of you. You can't explain it, but it's just there. I love when they have these wonderful documentaries on dance, and they're showing these kids on the street, Black kids who are just doing what they think are original dances they're creating. And then all of a sudden they flip back and you see in Africa or somewhere, they're doing the exact same thing. And it's this interesting link, and it's just fascinating that here it is folks who've never met each other, probably don't speak the same language, but they're connected through
Right.
that DNA, and they have that same stuff in them. It's fascinating. It's like, wow. So, you know, we may not know exactly, but we do. You know what I mean?
It's there. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Jonathan Lee Iverson, thank you so much for taking this time. Thank you so much for sharing your life, your story, your wisdom, your light with all of us here. It's been an honor and a privilege, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you more.
Absolutely.
Not recorded, just to be able to share in your presence and broaden my horizons with your light.
Oh man, that would be great. I think we'd be able to get back outside and play again.
Right.
Maybe we could do a speaking tour or something, man.
Oh yeah,
that would be great. Oh man.
Yeah. Thank you everybody for joining us here. And remember, you are enough. Have a great day, and thank you for joining here on Billosophy.